Today I have Mark Hershberg. He's a fractional CTO, CPO for tech companies all across the US. He's a speaker, he's an MIT instructor, and he's an author of the book, The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills That No One Taught You.
And again, it was the 90s. Software was really growing. We didn't use the word tech startups yet, but they were starting to be there. In 1995, internet was Time's Man of the Year, I think. This is when I kind of came onto the scene. I wasn't excited. I wasn't moving towards it. I was moving away, but I had to make a decision. And I got a little lucky here because it turns out that was the right fit. Going into a small tech startup.
If you don't know what you want to do in life, try things out. This is the lesson derived from your story.
Yes. That quote, of course, has been said by many military generals. Mike Tyson, he's a famous boxer. His version is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
They were saying hire for obvious, glaring strength, not for the collective absence of weaknesses. So person should be a superstar in something.
So I would say with sales, you do have to be a little, pushy is too strong a word, but you have to be forward. You have to say, here's what I've got. You've got to show off your wares, but not too much.
You can learn how to be charismatic, which is interesting.
When you do a book, it's an incredible amount of time. And here's the secret.
Everybody, welcome to Be Yourself Podcast, the podcast on expressing our true selves. Today I have Mark Hershberg. He's a fractional CTO, CPO for tech companies all across the US. He's a speaker, he's an MIT instructor, and he's an author of the book, The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills That No One Taught You. Mark, thank you very much for being a guest on my podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on. It is my pleasure to be here.
Mark is coming over for the second time. For those of you guys who've been following me, you might have seen my first conversation with Mark, and it actually got a lot of eyeballs. And I'm super, super thrilled to pick up right where we left off, Mark.
Well, so Mark, it's great to be back, and hopefully we can add some more value to your audience.
Absolutely. But before we do that, would you please introduce yourself once again and tell us how the year 2024 started for you?
Sure. I'll do a little of my background, then we'll talk about the start of the year. My background, I came out of MIT back in the 90s, back during the dot-com era, and began my career as a software developer. I knew I wanted to get into a leadership position. I wanted to be a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And I recognized that to be successful in that role, there were a number of skills I would need that I didn't yet have. Leadership, communication, hiring, team building, negotiating. Skills we've heard about, but no one actually sat down and taught them to me. So I set out on a journey to develop them in myself. We didn't have great podcasts like this back then. It was a lonelier journey. And as I was doing so, I recognized these skills would help everyone on my team, not just myself, not just those in the C-suite. So I began to upskill my team as well. Now I went on in my career and I am a CTO, CPO these days. I've been doing that for many years. But in parallel, something happened. MIT, where I'd gone to school, had gotten feedback from companies saying, we want to see these skills in the people we hire, not just your students, not just recent college grads, not just engineers, but everyone we hire. We want these skills, and we can't find it either. So MIT, of course, listens well and said, wait a sec, if you want this, it's our job to get this into our alumni, into our students and alumni. So set out to create a program to do that. When I heard about it, I reached out and said, hey, I've got some content. Maybe this is helpful. Please take it. Best of luck. They said, not so fast. Help us create more content. This is good. It's not enough. So I stayed and helped them create some more. And then they said, we have these great world-class professors, but they're academic and you're a practitioner. And we think it would be helpful to have this class have both sides. So we have the professors teaching from Sloan and the School of Engineering, but also practitioners like myself. And now for over 20 years, I've also been teaching these skills at MIT. And that led to the book, the app, and the speaking in parallel to my tech career as a CTO. Oh, you also asked about start of my 2024. So it's a good start to the year. 2023 was kind of a rough year, I think, for many people, just lots of volatility. Certainly in the tech world, we've seen a credit crunch with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, with rising interest rates the last almost 2 years. It's been a little volatile. And so it feels like things are really starting to thaw these days. I took my first real vacation in about 3 years at the end of December. And so I got to go on vacation, had a nice relaxing vacation. I then went to the Renaissance weekend event, which is how I celebrate every New Year's these days. And I emceed a comedy show New Year's Eve. It was a lot of fun. Great seeing friends. I had a really good start to the year. So I'm very excited about 2024. I feel like I have some good relaxation and momentum going into it. And I'm excited for what 2024 is going to bring.
I'm excited to hear that you had such a great time starting the year, because sometimes shifting our focus is the best thing that we can give us. Just shifting to something different, completely different, forget about work, and then just get back with all this new brain power and energy. And Mark, you mentioned something very interesting. For me, as a person who wasn't able to find things that I really loved till I was probably around 29, you said that you distinctly knew that you wanted to pursue a career as a software engineer, moreover, be someone in a leadership position. Can you elaborate more on that? How did you know, and at what age did you know that this is something that you want to pursue, and how come? Did you have a role model?
Let me give you a little more background on that, because of course it's not as simple as it sounds. It's like when you hear the story of the overnight success that took them 5 years to be the overnight success.
Yeah.
When I was younger, obviously I started with I want to be a fireman, I want to be whatever little kids want to be, including actually for me, stockbroker at one point. But when I was 9, I learned about physics, and I got very excited about physics and decided I wanted to be a physicist. That was the plan. I also decided I wanted to get into programming. And this came about because in high school, I was trying to take an elective. I wanted to go into politics as well. And so I wanted to take the elective justice. And I signed up for it. And my guidance counselor said, "Oh, we're not offering that next year. Choose something else." But I had no plan B. I sat there with no other options. So my guidance counselor did what we would hope guidance counselors do. She said, "Why don't I sign you up for computer programming 1? I don't know. But she understood. She knew I was 80s nerd. I was into math, as into science. She figured out, hey, computers, he'd like this. And it has a future. And so I signed up for it thinking, well, I'll change it. I'll do something else later. But never got around to it. And I got to the class and I loved it. I said, okay, I really like this. So I knew physics, I knew programming, and I knew I wanted to go into politics. I went to MIT and followed all 3 of those paths. I double majored in physics, in EECS, electrical engineering and computer science, and minored in political science. Now, I got turned off from politics when I was working on a political campaign and saw how the sausage was made. Said, you know what? I do not want to do that. This is not the right path for me. So dropped out of that. I was still interested in physics, but 2 things happened. One, physics funding was declining at this point. It was the end of the Cold War. Funding was declining. And my advisor, I wanted to do theoretical physics. And my advisor very politely said to me, I'm going to say it more bluntly, the problem with theoretical physics, there's about 100 people who lead, and everyone else just kind of follows along and doesn't really do anything interesting. And you ain't one of those 100. He said again, much more diplomatically,
is
but
stiff.
Yeah, those I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I am not one of the top 100 physicists, 100 theoretical physicists in the world.
This is the area where you should either be one of the top level players, or there's just no pretty much essence in being in the middle or something, right?
Exactly. You could get a faculty position somewhere and have a job, but you won't be making positive contributions to the field.
Okay.
Okay, that's not a fit. So software. And again, it was the 90s. Software was really growing. We didn't use the word tech startups yet, but they were starting to be there. In 1995, internet was Time's Man of the Year, I think. This is when it kind of came onto the scene. So, okay, this seemed like the right path. But even then, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, because just picking a field isn't sufficient. For example, if you think about, I want to be a lawyer, there's still multiple paths. You can go into big law, those big law firms. You can do smaller boutique law firms. You can go out on your own. You can be in-house at a company. There's different subfields within law. You could do nonprofit law. So just saying, I want to do law, there's still a lot of variety, a lot of different things. Or even some lawyers who say, I'm going to use my skills and do something else, like be an agent. So I knew software, but there was other decisions to be made. And I knew the options I looked at. There was big tech, and big tech back then was Microsoft, and I think maybe
IBM.
Yahoo was going to be big. IBM, thank you, that's the other one. It's not today's FANGs. They didn't exist yet. So that was one option. I said, that doesn't feel right.
It wasn't sexy at all at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It was something
it was
real
still
blurry.
Yeah, it felt very corporate. It felt, well, you can do software just in big corporations, and that didn't feel right to me. I could have gone to Wall Street. Wall Street was recruiting heavily, but again, it felt very corporate. And though there was a lot of money, the culture didn't feel right to me. And I wasn't excited about helping rich people make more money. Third option, the consulting firms. Back then, it was the big eight: Capgemini, BCG, McKinsey. McKinsey was an implementation, Arthur Andersen, now Accenture. So I had that option, but it also felt corporate to me. I said, none of these options feel good. We didn't quite use the term tech startups, but there were some smaller tech companies out there. And I wound up at one, not because I said this is the right fit. It's because I eliminated all the other options. I said, these three don't work. I guess I'll do this because I don't know what else to do. I wasn't excited. I wasn't moving towards it. I was moving away, but I had to make a decision. And I got a little lucky here because it turns out that was the right fit. Going into a small tech startup, that is the right fit for me. And so I figured out, I said, great, landed in a good place. So as of this point, early in my career, through my first job, early 20s, I was not directed. I was not well directed. I just landed somewhere by elimination. So don't worry if early in your career, you're not sure where you want to be. That's normal. Many of us go through that. Let me pause there. And I can continue the story, but let me just pause there so I'm not monologuing for 10 minutes straight.
Yeah. This is really fascinating because for a lot of people, especially in Ukraine, especially among my peers and the younger generation that, who learned the majority of the information from TikTok and all these short clips under 1 minute, let alone, watching or let alone reading books, not even listening to podcasts. But I hope this podcast will find its way to our younger audience. If you don't know what you want to do in life, try things out. This is the lesson derived from your story. Try things out, and I think the courage point here is to be able to say no to something that doesn't feel right. You distinctly emphasized how corporate wasn't in the line with what you wanted to do. Like, why is that so? Like, how can a person understand? Because I remember myself, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I started my first job as a support team member. The only thing that I was enticed by was the fact that I could practice my English. That's it, Mark. That was the only thing that really feathered me. But sometimes you know what you definitely don't want to do, and that this could be a guiding point. Can you pick up from here?
Absolutely. And let's dive into that a little more. I gave the example of lawyers. We're looking at the example of software engineers, because you might say, well, Mark, whether you're writing code at this small company or you're writing code at IBM or you're writing code for a Wall Street firm, your writing code isn't the same. And maybe some of the job is the same. I'm at the keyboard, I'm typing code, but the environment in which I'm doing it. And that can range from the motivation. Again, are you making rich people rich? Are you building a software product that will be used by millions of people, for example, at Microsoft? Are you trying to revolutionize some industry or even some small segment at a startup? Your mission, your goal may be different. The culture may be different. I did not like bureaucracy and policies. I didn't want to have to dress up. And on Wall Street back then, you still had to dress up. I said, I do not want any job that makes me dress up. Now, ironically, I actually wear French tuck shirts in the office just about every day, unless the weather's really bad or really hot.
Okay.
I actively dress up. I work in tech. I can show up in a t-shirt now, but I never wanted a job where I was forced to do it. And that mattered to me. So there are cultural things. There are other questions to look at. For example, how much travel. Some jobs keep you on the road quite a bit. Others don't. These days, this wasn't consideration back then, work from home. Back then, you were in the office 5 days a week, but now it's a question, how many days a week do you want to be in the office? Some say 5 days a week. Some might only be 2 or 3. What is it you want? Cultures such as how many meetings do you have? Some companies are very meeting heavy. Some are not. And maybe you prefer one over the other. We often think of a job as just that core aspect to it. So a common example here in the US, medicine. You think doctor, what does a doctor do? Well, I know what a doctor does. We all know what a doctor does. You see patients, you see sick people, and you give them prescriptions, you treat them, you test them. Okay, that makes sense. But if you ask an actual doctor here in the US, it might be different over in other countries with nationalized healthcare. But here in the US, doctors in private practice all complain, I have so much paperwork I have to fill out. Half my day is done filling out paperwork. And of course, if you're running a private practice, you have to market, you have to get new customers, you need to hire staff and manage staff. And there's a whole bunch of other things that aren't taking care of sick people, which is the core competency. And so you have to decide what you want. You can go into a hospital where there's probably a little less of that because the hospital has administrators to do it. On the other hand, in a hospital, you're not in control. You have to follow procedures and regulations. There's bureaucracy, or might be politics, which in your own company you don't have. And you just have to decide what feels better for you. So recognize when you look at a job, it's not just that core thing. There's a bunch of other things that can make you happy or sad. And some might be tolerable. You might say, I hate meetings, but you're going to have some meeting. You can't have a job with near zero meetings. But what level? Now, the other point you brought up, and I'll pause for a second. The other point you brought up is if you don't know what you want to do, try different things. I tell my undergrad students, say, look, if you're not sure what you want to do, find an internship. And if you're deciding between two, take the one that is less interesting. Because you can try it for a few weeks, say, wow, I hate this. It's 8 or 10 weeks long. You can survive that. And then you go off and say, I'm glad I tried it. I will never do that again. It's harder to do that when you're 30. But in your summer internships and even in your early to mid 20s, you can experiment a little. You can do a job for 18 months and say, wow, I didn't really like that. No more. I'm going down a different path. So don't be afraid to try. But again, it's not just about the core job. It's about these other aspects as well.
You know, when you were saying this, I recalled one interesting hiring rule that our investors were teaching us. They were saying, hire for obvious, glaring strength, not for the collective absence of weaknesses. So hire for a person should be a superstar in something. And there's definitely going to be sacrifices. He might be an amazing speaker. He energizes the entire team, but he's bad at putting data at Excel. So decide what's more important for you. And I think this principle applies to finding a proper workplace where there's definitely going to be something that you will dislike. But maybe there's something that you love and adore so much that you're just glued to this place and you want to be there every day, every single day in the morning, regardless of the weather and everything.
You should absolutely look for that. You should be moving towards a job, not just away from others.
Not away from others.
You may,
yeah.
especially early on as you're figuring yourself out. I mentioned the first job I took, I was just kind of moving away from others. And you might find yourself in that position, and that's okay, but then still view it as that experiment. Say, well, what's bringing me towards this job is I'm going to explore, is this the right culture, environment, type of role for me? And even put a timeline on it. Say, I'm going to do it for a year, and then I'm going to reevaluate, am I happy here? So that's okay, especially, again, early in your career. You can do it later, but it's a little harder. Having that little zigzag in your 40s can be a little hard. It's harder to get the job. It's harder to then pivot back unless you've got a long track record already where you're pivoting back to.
Same thing applies to dating, right? A lot of parallels here. We can talk about it a bit later. A quick note, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, and specifically the way it is edited, the way it's produced, the entire production of the podcast was completed by my team. And in addition to offering business communication lessons in English, the way I make a living is by helping people to launch a podcast. If you're interested in launching an audio or video podcast with the help of my great, talented Ukrainian team, we all speak flawless English, don't hesitate to contact me. You can see the examples of our work on my Instagram. I will leave the link to it in the description. And in addition to that, if you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks a lot and enjoy the show further. What I read on your blog before we started the show was that a good negotiator puts in a lot of effort before ever setting foot in the room. So a negotiator is always well prepared. And I wanted to ask you, Mark, along these lines, how well prepared should be an applicant applying for a position? Do you think that there is place for improvisation during the job interview, or it should be strictly checking the marks if we fit each other?
You are right that a good negotiator is prepared. You do significant work, multiple amounts of hours outside the room as what you do inside the room. But that doesn't mean you don't improvise. In fact, we often tell people who want to get very good at negotiations, take improv classes, or for musicians, learn jazz, because improvisation.
Because negotiation never goes according to a plan. Is that correct to say?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Just like if you think about a sports team, you're doing drills, you're doing practices, you're doing a lot of work off the field. You can't just say, but wait, they're doing something we didn't plan for that. Stop, I don't know what to do. No, you're in the game. You just go with it. You make it work. Now, when you think of interviewing is sales. We are selling ourselves. Actually, both sides are selling. People miss this. We normally think sales, well, I've got a product. Hey, you should buy my product, and here's why it's great. When you're in an interview, you should buy my product. My product is me. You should hire me. I'm great. It's true on the other side as well. Hi, I'm selling this great job opportunity. You should buy it because the job opportunity with my company is great. Both sides should be selling. Now, if you talk to a salesperson, I strongly recommend you do, because we want to use sales and marketing techniques on both sides of the table. You're going to know it starts with being prepped. A salesperson doesn't just walk in and say, hey, I'm selling vacuum cleaners, so tell me a little about what you do here, and if you need vacuum cleaners and how you might use them. They'll have done the research to say, I get what you're doing and why a vacuum cleaner may help you. And here's the specific type of vacuum cleaner I'm going to be talking about. But then, of course, they're going to hear, oh, okay, you just told me something I didn't know. I did a lot of prep. It's not perfect. And in the moment, realize new information and adjust the sales pitch. You're going to do the same thing. You want to prep. You want to do as much as you can, but you're not going to know everything. And you're going to dynamically adjust in the moment. And again, this is true for both sides. The candidate and the hiring manager plan your sales pitch plan your evaluation of the other side, and improvise in the moment.
Mark also mentioned this quote, allegedly often used by Mike Tyson, who said that a plan never survives a contact with an enemy. So that means, and on this same blog post, you said that we should apply the improv kind of method used by a lot of stand-up comics, where we say yes and. I think it more, and we can smoothly transition to more of a networking part of our like teaching, because what we're doing here is educating folks. So this is the rule that we can heavily apply when we're networking. So to never end the conversation and to smoothly transition to the place that where we want to go, even if it started somewhere completely different.
Yes, that quote, of course, has been said by many military generals. Mike Tyson, he's a famous boxer. His version is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
And he uses it literally.
And it's what we talked about. You go into that sales meeting, that negotiation, even a conversation and networking, and you have your plan. Hey, I want to sit down and talk to you about something. But of course, you're going to direct the conversation as well. And so if I just say, well, this is my plan. Oh my God, you're throwing me off my plan. I'm in trouble. But just like the athletes, like the improv comedians, like the negotiators, we adapt in the moment. And the key thing, when we will use negotiation as an example, if you didn't start with your plan, if you didn't start with, well, here's what I really want to get, here's what I'm willing to trade off on, here are the things I won't trade, that's very important to me. If you don't have that in the moment, you can get caught up. You can give away things you didn't want to. You can forget to bring up something you really thought was important. You might do bad trade-offs. You weren't prepared. Just like as an athlete, if you haven't run the drills, in the moment you might just get flustered and your shooting is off or something else is not as good as it should have been. So with conversations as well, you want to think, in this conversation, here is my goal. Now, this sounds a little more rigorous. I'm not saying every conversation I have with someone, I've got my set goal. Plenty of them are just conversations. But if, for example, I'm at a conference or a professional event, I have certain goals. My goals are to learn about the other person. Yeah. Maybe if I think this is going to be a place for selling, I might want to make sure they understand what I am working on. Maybe it's looking for opportunities for us to look together, to work together. It could just be, how can I relationship build? These are some of the goals I'm coming in with. And so as we have the conversation, I might steer it a certain way to make sure, oh, we haven't gotten to talk about my thing. I think he's going to be excited to learn about my thing. How do I subtly direct the conversation? Not just say, hey, wait, we got to talk about me. But how do I bring it up? Maybe, oh, yeah, I totally get what you're going through. You know, we just went through something like that at my company. So yeah, I know that's a really difficult thing to be in. Okay, now I've kind of direct us. You might say, well, what is your company, or what is it you do, or what is your experience? So these little slight directional changes can help move the conversation where we want to take it to get more value out of these conversations.
You know, I've been to a networking event, a pretty big one in the end of the year. It was solely in English, which was surprisingly awesome, you know, for me. And I thought that I had an advantage going in there. And you know what I felt? I felt like I almost have a joker, have an ace up my sleeve, and I almost didn't want to use it unless it was necessary. And here's the question for you, Mark. How often showing your superiority in something can hurt the potential deal? I think we're going to touch some psychological material, psychological part of you know, our human nature, but I, for one, didn't want intentionally didn't want to show off, right? And I knew sometimes people are composed I'm this energetic, pretty confident fella. Do you ever utilize some kind of psychological tricks to make the counterparty feel better? Do you have something like that you use at your disposal?
Well, I will never use tricks, but
Tricks,
I
yeah.
will in fact work to make sure the person I'm speaking with or people I'm speaking with are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a famous story in the book, The Charisma Myth, written by my friend Olivia Fox Caban. It is a wonderful book, and it teaches you how to be charismatic. It is a great book. I highly recommend.
You can
In this book,
learn how to be charismatic, which is interesting
you
in the first
can
place.
learn. It is a learnable skill, just like you can learn accounting or football or any other skill, just like you can learn leadership, negotiation, networking skills I teach. Charisma is learnable. And
And
it
you
does
fake
go
it till you make it, right? First, it doesn't
I
feel natural, or no?
well, so I do not like the term fake it till you make it because it sounds disingenuous. But you first try and it may not feel natural, but you're not faking it. Just like, to use a sports analogy, you might start out doing something in a new sport and you have to be really conscious of it. And say, okay, this isn't natural. I have to really concentrate and focus. You're not faking it. You're really doing it. It just takes a lot more effort. And then later, as you're more advanced, you say, okay, I can do this without thinking about this particular thing. It's just more natural. And that's what we
Agree.
want with these skills.
Yeah.
So she gives this great story. She's not the first one to tell this story, I don't think. It's in the UK when Disraeli is running against someone else for prime minister, I believe. I forget his opponent. And a woman has dinner with Disraeli and with the other person. A newspaper then asks her, well, you just had dinner with both of the leading candidates. What's your opinion? And I can't remember who was who, but she said, one of these candidates it sounded like the most interesting man in the world. He was brilliant. He was fascinating, just so incredible. And then the other one made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. He made me feel brilliant and fascinating and amazing.
Yeah.
And it was that second candidate that won. And so when you show up and go, hey, here's why I'm awesome. It is arrogant. You're making the other person feel inferior, and they're probably not going to like that. Now, that's not saying hide everything. When I meet someone who's a Nobel laureate, they don't show up saying, hi, I'm a Nobel laureate. But if it comes up, okay, that's impressive. And most of us say, well, you're an Olympian, you're a Nobel laureate, you're a best-selling author. Okay, that's impressive. I probably want to pay more attention to you than someone else. But they don't beat you over the head with it. And the best people make you feel special. Because when you walk away, what Olivia teaches us in her book, when you walk away and you say, wow, I had such a good time with this person,
Yeah.
you want to spend more time with that person.
Like you feel heard. There's just something about people who can make you feel heard. And this is something that I need to learn to do as a podcaster. I think this is what Joe Rogan is an expert in. He is always consulting his ignorance. He's asking dumb question, which requires courage to an extent, correct? And he listens carefully. And I think for us, it's a question of self-esteem. Make no mistake about it, but being able just to listen, sometimes even asking something that you might partially have an answer for, but give the person the stage to answer, right? I think is just an amazing human skill, as Simon Sinek calls it. He doesn't like the term soft skills. He says that there's nothing soft in knowing how to listen, for example. He calls it human skills.
I like calling them firm skills. Firm skills. As in corporate, and firm because they're not totally soft. They're not quite quantitative. So we've used the term firm skills. I mentioned in the book. Let me give you a specific technique you can use.
Please.
I was single for a very long time in New York City and going on many, many dates. I was very proactive in trying to meet someone.
I remember you told me that last time we saw each other. Okay.
I have gone on probably about 700 first dates in my lifetime. That's my estimate from looking through my calendar and doing some projections. I sat through a lot of mediocre and bad first dates where you show up and within a few minutes you're thinking, I am just not, there's not a fit here. But I'm not going to walk out on my date after 5 minutes. I need to spend time with her. I need to be polite. So here's what I would do. I'm on the date. I think I've got another 45 minutes minimum here. There is something about this woman I'm with that is interesting. I don't know what it is, but there's something. Maybe she has a really interesting hobby. Maybe she just visited a really interesting place. Maybe she grew up in some location that's very different from mine and will have a different perspective. I don't know what it is, but I am going to spend the next 45 minutes trying to learn it. I'm looking for that needle in a haystack. And the act of looking, because I'm asking her about her, I'm paying attention to her, I am listening, I am very engaged. And
Practice
that focuses
curiosity.
Yeah, it's better than, okay, great. How many minutes left? Okay, have another sip. Oh, great. How many minutes left now? I'm focused on her, and I might learn something. I might even make a friend, and I have. There are plenty of dates that turned into friends for me, and I've learned things. So when you're in a conversation, you're thinking, why am I talking to this person? But you're stuck. Think there is a needle in this haystack. There is something interesting about this person, and my job is to find it. And that's going to focus you and engage you in the conversation and create a positive outcome for both of you.
You said that the last time we spoke, you said that we have to think long term, not transactional when we go networking. And you also mentioned that you even go in thinking about how I can help. So it's not like me having an agenda. I'm looking for a job. Are you offering a job? No, sorry. Next. It's more along the lines, how can I be helpful? But this also borders with this. I think this is one of the best advice that I've heard in the entire year when you said about giving how about the tenderness of the science of giving an advice. How actually it. Can you elaborate more? Maybe you've gotten some new insights into this art of how do you offer an advice if you really care. Let's take a case where we really care for a person, but we're not sure if they're willing to take an advice, but you know that they would benefit. How would you approach a situation like that?
Very carefully. One of my biggest pet peeves is that people offer unsolicited advice.
To you.
And to me or to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I see people do this all the time, and sometimes I can watch the body language of the recipient thinking like, yeah, come on, I don't care. I know I've gotten unsolicited advice, well-intentioned. I don't blame them. They're trying to be helpful, but it might be, I already know that, or this is not how I like to do it, so it's not a fit. It doesn't align to my values or my situation. Or I might just disagree and think it's wrong.
Yeah.
Again, I know it's well-intentioned, so I'm very careful about giving personal advice. Now, I will go on in my blog and podcast and say, hey, here's general advice. I have no idea who you, the listener, are. And if it's not helpful, fast forward through that part. Hopefully there's other parts that are better. But I'm very careful, and I won't just say, oh, let me tell you about this. I usually ask permission. I have some thoughts, but only if it's helpful. And I give them a very clear out. You might already be set in this. So they can say, yeah, I'm good. I talked to someone else yesterday. I'm good on this, because I want them to be able to say no. If it's just like, well, I've got some great advice. Would you like to hear it? It's hard for them to say, oh, no, I don't want your great advice. You're saying them up when you say, I've got some great advice on this because I've been through a similar thing. But you might already have gotten lots of advice. You might even be tired of hearing advice on this. So only if you're interested.
Permission-based approach. And I think this technique can be also used in sales. Permission-based approach. May I add something to this conversation? May I offer you something? For example, right now I'm offering this new service of mine of starting starting a podcast for people and also starting their YouTube channel. And I have a lead, a woman who already working on her YouTube, but there's so many things that she just does wrong, Mark. And I know that potentially it can increase my sales pitch. It can strengthen my sales pitch, but at the same time, it can ruin everything. So I sent her a message. If you will be ever interested in having some analysis as far as your channel goes, I'm here. I got something that I want to say. Maybe even saying this was too much, because if the person is defensive, I got something that can help you could be pretty pushy, right?
With sales, there's a fine line. And now most people, when you're selling we're selling a corporation, my job isn't as personal. If you say, hey, I've got something for your job, I happen to know the woman who you're speaking to, and it's her personal business. So it's a little more personal and connected to her.
No, it's not Marnie. It's a different lady. It's a different lady.
We have a name. Okay, that's someone else. So I would say with sales, you do have to be a little pushy is too strong a word, but you have to be forward. You have to say, here's what I've got. You've got to show off your wares, but not too much. And one of the things I hate is when I get a sales pitch, they will do their demonstration and they'll have their set 30-minute, here's my pitch. And it starts with telling the history of the company and then this and that. And it's a lot of things that aren't relevant for me. And that wastes my time, and I'll even tune out before you get to what is relevant. So you do want some of that exploration. In fact, one of the best sales guys I have ever known, he's a former Army Ranger. This guy is incredible. Army Rangers are very special people. They've had advanced training, and they know how to plan missions under very dire conditions. He looked at these sales calls. He would plan it the way I imagined he would plan one of his missions. Maybe not quite as intense because lives weren't on the line. But he'd say, okay, before we go into this meeting, here's who we got. Here's who we have from our side. Here's who's going to be there from their side. Here's their backgrounds. We're going to start the meeting like this. I'm going to start out. We're going to do introductions. We're going to ask for them. Then we're going to go through and we're going to do you in this order. Then I'm going to walk through, here's the agenda we have for the meeting, and do a check-in. We're going to talk about this, then something else. Is that your expectation? And at that point, they might say, no, we don't care about that. Just this and the other thing. Okay, we'll adjust. And then he'll start into something and he'll do these checks to make sure we're still relevant and focused. And I thought this was brilliant. I've never seen any other salesperson that proactive and engaged. And that's what you want to do. You have your plan going in. No plan survives contact with the enemy. So he adjusts the plan as he goes and always keeps it relevant to the other party.
Sales is something that we should definitely talk a little bit more. But before that, I recently watched a very rare interview of Jeff Bezos, recent interviews at Lex Friedman's podcast. And he was telling about how they approach running meetings, which is very, very creative. They don't send an agenda. One person creates a memo, a very, very deep, focused and descriptive memo that they all read in the beginning of the meeting. So they allocate like 10-15 minutes to read the memo, because in fact, for all the meetings, people are expected to read the agenda. But what Jeff argues is that, in fact, no one actually does it. So people kind of jump into a meeting and trying to sneak into the agenda. So they actually allow some time, and there is a difference between a memo and just an agenda for him. So I think, do you share my belief? I actually have a friend in Ukraine. They are a startup. They are building an an app or a Google Chrome extension to simplify running meetings, believe it or not. Can you give us a few thoughts on how the meetings are run right now in the corporate world in America? If it's a really, really big pain for a lot of people, and then maybe we can talk about sales.
It is a pain for most people. It's one of the biggest complaints I hear. I do like his idea. Now, I believe in agendas, but I agree with his approach that often people show up, they have different levels of background because we're busy, we're running from one meeting to another, and saying we're going to spend X minutes at the start of the meeting getting everyone on the same page. I do like the idea. I'm going to have to think more about that and how we might incorporate that into some of the meetings I run and what we do. Cool. Now, I would recognize that perhaps not every meeting needs that. And one of the things I talk about in the book, there are 3 basic types of meetings, but we often screw it up because we don't recognize what type of meeting this is. And I say types of meetings, you can have multiple ones in the same meeting, but you want to understand that. So I almost think of them, this goes to my physics roots, 3 unit vectors, 3 components, 3 building blocks, if you will, for meetings. So 3 different types of meetings. There are 1 to N meetings. That's the broadcast meeting. That's a meeting, you might have a quarterly meeting where the CEO or the executive team does an all hands meeting and says, we want to update you. We want to pass this information on to you. One or a small number of people, too many people. The second type of meeting is end to end. And that's where you have multiple people in the room, and generally everyone has to share with everyone else. This is common for a status update meeting. In software engineering, we have a daily scrum where we go around, everyone says, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm going to do today. And just everyone says, okay, good, I'm on top of where things are. Probably your team has a weekly meeting where just everyone reports in project status. And so everyone has something to share that's relevant to maybe not 100%, but most other people need to be aware. And likewise, you need to be aware of most other people. That's an end-to-end meeting. And then finally, you have decision meetings. And that's where you have to make a decision. Decision might be, we have to set the budget for next year. Decision might be, we have to vote on a new paint color for the break room. Whatever it is, big, small, a decision has to be made. Now, I'm not including this one-on-one conversations. Those aren't meetings. Those are one-on-one conversations. That could be boss giving someone feedback. It could be 2 people coordinating. Those are separate. But these are the common meetings that we have as groups of people when there's more than 2 people meeting. And so those are the 3 components. What's important is to recognize, what are you trying to achieve? Because so often you will have, for example, an end-to-end meeting. You have these people and saying, okay, we're doing our update. And someone says, oh, you know what? We have to decide on this. Okay, let's also, while we're all here, let's do that. But you know who's not in the room? Carol. And Carol is key for that decision. And you say, okay, let's do it. Or you didn't plan to have that decision, so no one is prepped for it. And so the problem is one meeting morphs into another, but people might not be prepared. You might have the wrong people in the room or not the right people in the room, and it gets messy. So be very clear on what you're trying to achieve. And you can say, look, we're going to have the 1 to N. I'm going to give you all an update because I just got back from some important meetings myself. And then we're going to have our quick updates, and then we're going to make a decision. And that's fine as long as you are explicit and you say, do we have the right people for each one of those components?
I remember this quote that also by Simon Sinek. He said that trust is what happens. No, there is this quote by famous composer. I forgot who he was. He said that music is what happens between the notes, and Simon said that trust is what happens between the meetings. On this point, we're living in a post-COVID era. I don't know, can you tell about the landscape of the US corporate world right now? How many people returned to the offices? How many employers require people to return to the offices? Or there's a new normal that we're now applying to our daily life?
Great question. I wrote back in 2022, maybe even 2021. I've said this on podcasts where people are saying, have we shifted? Are we going to be virtual or semi-remote?
Mm.
And my response was, we have to see what happens the next few years. Because if the economy cratered and we're all desperate for jobs, in that case, companies are going to say, we want you back. And everyone will say, well, I need the job and I will do it. And that would have just been a blip. I argued if it stayed for 3 to 5 years, and so we're now about almost 4 years into it, it's starting to get institutionalized where it becomes the norm. I think there's a window where if corporations don't push a certain way, where things stand today is going to be the new normal, is going to be the standard, where a company then needs to justify why it's off the standard. Now, we know this is only a small number of jobs. My friend Jeff Wald wrote a book called The End of Jobs. And in it, he gives the data that I think less than 50% of jobs, maybe it's a little over, under, can be remote. There's plenty of jobs that have to be done in person. Working on an assembly line. I certainly want my surgeon to be there in person. Although we're starting to see robotic techniques that might suggest they can do some remote. Still, I'd like them there in case something goes wrong. Plenty of jobs that need to be in person. For companies, we have a couple dynamics at play. Individuals like working from home. We like the flexibility. We like I got to pick up the kids for 15 minutes and it's great. I can do it from home. I wrote one of my more popular blog posts is your manager may not be as excited. Why your manager is less excited about remote work than you are. Because you're a contributor and you just need to get it done. Your manager needs to spend time understanding what's going on, coordinating. And so your manager may not have the same visibility. Your manager could see things from just as spontaneous hallway conversations to even, I could see things like when I walk out into the area where most of the team is, are people collaborating and working together? Are people, I can see the body language, these two people aren't getting along. Are people feeling stressed about, we've got a big deadline coming up this week? Are people feeling stressed? You can feel that tension. You can't get as much information when remote, and you have to be more explicit. So managers are less excited about that and want people in the office more. So you have different motivations. Now, there's something else we're going to be seeing in the coming years. What I've argued is for offices that are semi-remote, if you're going to be in the office 1 or 2 days a week, or even less for some, you need to focus more on social. That seems counterintuitive. You think, well, that's where we need to get together, and that's when we're together to do work. And yes, and there are certain things that maybe there's things that are more independent. We do those the other days. And when we're in the office, that's when we have meetings. It might be, meetings are so easier when done face-to-face. Standing at a whiteboard together, still easier physically at the whiteboard than trying to use virtual tools. Do that in person, but also let those water cooler conversations happen. Also let people, you know what, hey, you and I'm going to grab coffee. Why don't you come with me? And instead of 5 minutes, it's going to be 15 or 20 minutes because we're talking a lot. But that's building those relationships, which is really important. Those internal networks are important for the company. They're important for you. And one thing I worry about, the people who say, I moved 500 miles away to a beach because I can do my job remotely.
Yeah.
You can indeed. You can do that. But there are 2 longer term consequences. You're not building those internal relationships. And that can hurt you when it comes to your long term opportunities, promotions, even just being aware, reading the corporate tea leaves gets a lot harder when you're remote. Second, you still have concentrated areas of industry. We might be remote. New York is still the head of finance. LA is still the head of Hollywood. You still have these areas where this is the space and this is where the after work activities and just running into people are just saying, hey, let's meet up. You can't do it as easily when you're 500 miles away. And I've been someone saying it's good that you can do virtual coffees now, but being in person is still better. And so we have to be careful that when you are fully remote, well, I fly in once a quarter when they need me. you're still going to miss out, and that could have some long-term impact. So those are a couple basic things. Also, training up the younger folks. The younger folks need to be in the office, but that means some of us who aren't younger need to be in there to do that mentoring, to show the behaviors. So there's a lot of secondary effects, even if to a first order, yes, we can function remote.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. And I think you also posted about this lady that is actually flying in like once a week to her office. So from a financial standpoint, it makes sense, but from all the other standpoints, it doesn't make sense. And you wrote that she's missing out on the social capital. She's missing out on the opportunities that she would otherwise gain if she were just around her peers. Maybe a new job opportunity that would pop up out of nowhere, right? While if you're just living at the beach, I don't know, maybe there's some professions that are cool just being remote. That maybe people who are more introverted, but I still believe that the key to a healthy life lies within social interaction.
Now, that woman, for the record, this was a BBC article. She has summer internship, and her calculation was getting an apartment in the New York metro area was expensive. There were cheap commuter flights, and she could spend time with her family, which was important. I'm not saying never do it. In her case, it may have been the right call. Now, she was missing out, but still, there are trade-offs in life. So I'm speaking in general, we all need to recognize what are the trade-offs.
Okay.
I'll share a more recent BBC article that said companies are now doing corporate travel. Corporate travel has changed. Corporate travel used to be going off on a sales call or business development. And now, of course, we're saying, we can start with just a virtual meeting. That's good enough. And we can save so much time and money. I think we're all happier with that in most cases. So what's replacing that is, but you and I, who are coworkers, don't see each other as much. Let's get together more socially. We might have some meetings, but it's really more for that social aspect. As I was saying, when you get into the office that one day a week or a few days a month, do focus on the social because that's important. And we're starting to see corporate travel is focused on that. I was part of a virtual company as far back as 2017. I've actually had even virtual companies prior to that. 2017, we had a virtual company of about 30 people all over the US. And the executive team would get together about every 4 to 6 weeks for a few days. We'd bring everyone together less frequently. When we do that, we would have in-person meetings where we could dive deep and made sense to have folks. But we also made sure we did social activities together. We'd have dinner together every night. And we'd get nice, fancy dinners. We weren't paying for an office, so we could pay for nice dinners. We would go out and do some fun activity. From one time, it was s'mores on the beach. Another time, we were in Vegas. We went out to see a show and did things together. And it's doing that stuff together that really helped create those bonds that would lead to, in fact, I now have a client who was a salesperson at that company who says, hey, we need your help. And I got a job because he and I did get to know each other socially at that company. So this is important for long term.
This is so key. Tell us more, because I have a lot of my listeners are at the crossroads in terms of starting something in addition to their main job. It seems like we're living in this era now where everyone wants to express themselves, and that's something that I'm preaching about. I'm like telling you, we're all unique. We all have something to offer. Start with generating content. Start with putting your voice out. And your something that you told me was that it's a long road ahead. You have to just you have to get used to not being seen or not being like at the spotlight, like, because it takes a lot of time. Maybe I can combine the question of personal brand and sales and ask your general thoughts on how do we become an independent? How do we maybe create additional source of income? And and what are some keys that worked for you? And maybe you can touch on sales as well when you are trying to sell, not yourself to become a part of a team, but as yourself doing something or offering some service.
That's a very big set of questions. I'll
Yeah.
try to address it. We do see a lot of people taking on secondary work. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that's because they're not making enough with their primary job. And that's where the side hustle, I need more money, so I'll start being an Uber driver or doing something else.
That's
and the motivation there is primarily financial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some people do it because they do have a side passion that's not fully engaged with their primary job. And that's fine too. But let's talk about that road and what the expected ROI is. Now, I've written a book, and what everyone will tell you is you do not write a book to make money. And I didn't write my book to make money. I wrote it because I wanted to get the word out and help people. And I could give away for free, but then it's some free thing, and you kind of lose some credibility. It's the same reason newspapers used to charge 25 cents. Their money came from advertising. But if they just gave away the newspaper for free, it was seen as a lower end newspaper. They had to have some value. When you do a book, it's an incredible amount of time. And here's the secret. Most traditionally published books, when you go through a big publisher, the average book in its lifetime only sells 3,000 copies. If you're self-published, that number I've seen anywhere from 100 to 250. So people put all this effort to write a book, not to mention the whole process of the editing and getting the thing out there. And then any marketing they do, and it barely moves the needle. So if your hope is, I'm going to write a book and people will come, not happening.
Or I'm going to create a course. It could be something that you put a lot of effort into, right? A product.
So I was going to get to courses. People think, online courses, it's great because I just record a series of 6 one-hour videos, and then I've got the course, and there's a company that says I just upload the videos and they'll do the rest, and I take a split. But if you build it, they won't come unless you market it. And so for courses or for podcasts, you have to go out and you have to say, hey, pay attention. And that's the real effort, the marketing. For books, for courses, for podcasts, for your brand. It's an obscene amount of effort. I have on LinkedIn, I've got a couple thousand followers. I've spent $0 on marketing. Now I've put in some time. I go on podcasts and people hear me and add me. I was speaking to someone recently. He has 10 times the followers on LinkedIn. And I asked him, I said, I'm really curious how you did. And he said, I don't use bots or those farms. These are all legitimate people. But to do this, he spent 2 to 3 hours a day for a year going out using techniques that he had learned to engage with people online to build up his followers. And now he has tens of thousands. But even then, that was a lot of work. If you think about it, he was spending maybe 500, 800 hours to do this in a single year. But they're just followers. They're not sales yet. He now has to convert them into sales with a product. And so that ROI is questionable. I go on podcasts, and here's the truth. Podcasts, you sell a handful of books, any given podcast. There's a couple people say, Mark, he's an interesting guy. I'm going to buy his book. We'll get more app downloads because the app is free. So people are more like, okay, well, let me download the app. That doesn't cost me anything.
The app is Brain Bump, right? On App Store.
Yeah, Brain Bump. But even then, when you think about the time it takes, just the hour we're spending together, not including the emails back and forth or any prep time, and then you look at what you make per book, which for a traditionally published book, the royalties are going to be on average $1 a book. You're saying, wait a second, you're making far less than minimum wage. And now most people hope that once you buy the book, they'll be able to upsell you and say, okay, now buy my very expensive coaching packages. I am not a coach. I have no consulting, no executive coaching to sell
merchandise.
you. No merchandise. I do this as a passion project because my day job is fun, building tech startups. This is fun for me in a different way. I'm not worried about the money, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of frustration. Don't think this is the magic way to riches. It's a full-time job. It's a lot of work, and it may not give you the ROI. So if you're thinking of going down this path, recognize that most of the work is marketing. At least 50% of the work is constantly marketing yourself. And the world's just getting noisier because more and more people are doing it. So understand that and look at the ROI and see if you really want to do it. If money's your motivation, see if the numbers work out before you go down that path.
I'm hitting the wall of frustration when I was able to get some interest from people, but then the next step seems to be just so difficult, or for some reason people just are not sending the money, not pushing this button. And I remember this quote that I think Jim Rohn said it, that people don't spend major resources on minor things. So in sales, somehow you have to let them understand that what you're offering is actually valuable in their picture of the world.
I'll give you a small example of this. I wasn't too excited about putting this on the book, but based on marketing feedback, I had to. So on the back cover of the book, you have a little about the book. You have a blurb. And I've got a couple bullet points what this book will teach you. And I forget actually I have the book here, so I'm going to read off the back cover because I haven't read the back cover in a while. On the back cover, so we have things like creating a dynamic career strategy, building a high value network. Okay, these sound like good value propositions. And one of the bullet points, negotiating a job offer. And then parentheses, this alone will pay for the book.
Can you show the back cover? This alone will pay for the...
For those who are on the video, you can now see the back cover. For those who aren't, if you go to Amazon, you can see the back cover. It's in the Amazon description. But what I did there is I basically said, here's the ROI. If I can help you be a better negotiator in just a single job, you're going to make the book costs $20-some, depending on where you're buying it. You're going to negotiate for more than $20 in your job. There's a clear ROI.
Yeah.
And so that becomes an easy decision. I buy the book. They don't even have to read the whole book. They just have to read that one chapter. So I spend $20-some. I invest 45 minutes reading the chapter. You can easily get $500, $1,000. You can probably do better than that. But there you go, positive ROI. So I didn't like it. Felt a little gimmicky to me, but okay, I needed to do that. I understand.
From my perspective, I can say that I'm getting a ton of great stuff that is actually applicable, that is practicable. From Mark's blog. I haven't yet bought the book, but definitely when we think that people are giving out something for free and it's no good, we should put this type of thinking to bed, because there are a lot of good free stuff. Maybe even you can find everything for free, right? Some marketing is just a type of better packaging or something, but all this stuff is available for free. So I highly encourage you guys to go check Mark's blog, buy a book, or download a free app, which I actually installed, which sends you cool hints every single day on one of the topics that Mark covers in the book, and other books too as well, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
The Brain Bump app, so this is something that's free. The Brain Bump app, free on iPhone and Android. And what we've done is we've taken the key points from books, blogs, podcasts, and other sources. We're not one of those book summary apps, and we have the owner of that IP put it on there because we don't want to take someone's IP without their permission. They put in, here are the takeaways. It's as if you went through a book with a highlighter, but that's all done for you. It goes into the app, so you have it in your pocket the whole time. Because I know when I read books, I'll read it, I'll forget a few weeks later. So for example, you read that negotiation section, you go, okay, well, this is great. Well, I'm not negotiating a new job anytime soon. a year from now, when you're negotiating a raise or a new job, you can just open up the app and in seconds, because everything's tagged by topic, you say, give me that negotiation set of tips. They're right at your fingertips. Or you can set up to get that daily reminder. So if, for example, you want to be seen as a leader, imagine if you got every day, you might set to 9 a.m., you get a leadership tip. So right as you go into the office, it's like, oh, right, I got to remember to do more of that. And by seeing it over and over, it stays top of mind. If you don't want to get the daily reminders, you can turn it off. We only send you when you want, what you want. So it's always relevant. And this is all free, and we keep adding more content because, as I mentioned, I'm not here to sell you coaching or other services. I do this because I want to help people, and this is a great free tool to do that. So Brain Bump app, it's free and has that great advice.
I share your vision, Mark. I also started this podcast and started my content marketing for the same reason. I just want to share the experience that I've had in life and to be an example, to be a role model for someone who also wants to maybe pursue a career of independent consultant. So, and I'm super inspired by you. You are one of my role models, and I'm thankful that you found the time for us today. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate being here.